My name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here at Coeur de Terre Vineyard on January 15th, 2019. I'm here with Scott and Lisa Neal. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
I'm going to start you off by asking, why wine?
Why wine? Well, I'll start. Mm-hmm. So when I was, I grew up on a farm in Minnesota, and I think the impetus to coming to Oregon was to get back to the farm, get back to growing, get back to being connected to the earth, to the place, and that's really one thing that I really guess gained from my time as a farm kid in Minnesota. Is I loved the dirt and the earth and growing things and seeing that kind of process of through the seasons. And through our travels, I had met Lisa in Denver, is where we came from, in Colorado, and when I was a kid, wine was not a very important piece of my family's life. If it wasn't in a gallon jug with a thumb screw, and a big thing, and sitting in the fridge for a month or two, that's not what my parents drank. That was the stuff they had. So, as a kid, wine to me was nothing that was anything special. And then at one point, I was working with a guy at a business that I was at, and he was kind of a big wine guy, and he said, and he kept talking about wine. I'm like, really, wine's not that big of a deal. I don't know what you're talking about. That's that bad stuff that tastes like vinegar that my parents drank. But he said, no, you got to try this bottle of wine with me. And it was a Stag's Leap Cask 23, 1987. And he brought it out, and I tasted it. I'm like, this is not the wine that I've had. And so started getting more into wine, and as we kind of got into it, we started, experiencing other types of wines, and we have a tendency to kind of get into stuff and look at it and start diving into that kind of, down the rabbit hole. And at one point, we had Pinot Noir, and Burgundy specificely, mm-hmm. and started looking at that, kind of focusing on that Pinot Noir was really something special. And it all kind of coalesced. We had been married a couple of years earlier. At our wedding, we had Pinot Noir at the wedding.
Oregon Pinot Noir. With salmon, yes.
Which was strictly nothing at that point like, boy, we have to have Oregon Pinot Noir. We weren't at that point yet. It just happened. Mm-hmm. So there was this kind of confluence of events that kind of was angling us to this, wanting to get back to farming. Pinot Noir kept getting more and more important. And I had a job, I remember it was like 97, 96, something like that. I had a job where I was actually an outside salesperson, and I was covering Oregon. Mm-hmm. And I was here, and Wine Spectator had just done a cover article on Oregon wine. This thing that's coming up, and you never heard of it, but Oregon has wine. And so Lisa said, why don't you spend an extra day and look around? And because we were thinking like Denver, living in the suburbs was not our gig, and that's not where we wanted to be. So she said, why don't you look around and see if see what's out there. So I spent a day looking around, and we had very, very little money. We had this little suburban house in suburban Denver, and I looked around and I saw that I think we could actually afford to buy something out here and move to Oregon. We didn't have lot of anchors holding us in Denver. We certainly had family and things, but we didn't have this had to be there kind of thing. And we were young and stupid enough to be able to do it.
And fortunate, so fortunate. We sold like $130,000 starter home in Colorado and bought 50 acres down this muddy gravel road for, what was it? I think they were asking like 310 or 315. We negotiated it down to 272,000, yep. Which was so much for us. Sure. It was like, how are we going to pay this mortgage? But yeah, it's a very different story, I think, than a lot of the other stories. We really wanted to be here. We went through the sacrifices to get here, and but so fortunate that everything kind of lined up for us in that time period, mm-hmm. because times have definitely changed, right?
Yeah, it was crazy. I mean, to think that we could, literally, we came in 98, Memorial Day of 98, after that original trip, we decided, let's go out and we decided we're going to move to Oregon. And the idea was in Memorial Day weekend of 1998, we're going to come to Oregon, get a feel for the place, find a place to rent in McMinnville, while we found the right spot. That weekend we were cruising around and literally just getting lost, getting a map of Yamhill County and driving down every road we could, visiting some wineries, Memorial Day being a big weekend still even back then. And at one point we drove down Eagle Point Road, which is, as you saw this morning, it's out of the way. And we literally saw a for sale sign at the bottom of this hill. And we had a compass, like a regular compass, there was no smartphones or anything, and it was a south-facing exposure. There was blackberries and poison oak growing on the land, and we called the realtor because the people who owned it were away, and she said, yeah, just go ahead and walk the land. There's a funny story about that, Lisa, I'm sure we'll share, that we walked the land, and we bought it that weekend. Lisa wrote up an offer on her laptop, and when we were spending a day out in Newport, because we wanted to go out to the coast too, wrote up an offer and it was accepted, and we moved in on Labor Day weekend of 1998. And
there were a lot of contingencies in place too, so it was contingent upon them being able to divide the property and be able to get a residential permit down there. It was contingent upon the sale of our little starter home. There were all of these contingencies in place, but it was just like, everything slowly just fell into place, and it was effortless. It was really, and for me, I feel like when things are effortless like that, there is, you're in the flow. It's meant to be.
Meant to be, right.
Yes.
Yeah, it's funny because and from that point where you wrote up the contract in Newport, we didn't see the land again until we moved in. So it was this entire summer of pieces falling, dominoes falling into place.
Checks to people like Kevin Chambers, who used to own Oregon Vineyards, to come dig pits, and septic something was wrong with the septic. We just kept cutting checks.
And like, is this really going to happen?
Yeah.
And we literally loaded up a U-Haul trailer on Labor Day weekend of 1998. My dad and I drove the U-Haul out. Lisa and her sister were in a car with a bunch of other stuff. And we landed here on September 1st and moved in.
Yeah.
And pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Kind of like, wow, what have we done?
Was there hesitation? Were there concerns you had when this idea first arose, or was it pretty much like, hey, that's a good idea, let's try it?
No, I think that Scott and I were of the similar mindset. So I grew up in Colorado, and why wine for me? I had left Colorado, which is in the West, and went on this big adventure that took me to Florida, South America, Washington D.C. When I was in Washington D.C., I worked at a distributor. And I had a friend there that worked for one of the wine distributors. So I was able to taste these wines that I would never be able to afford at that age. But I knew that was not my path to stay in DC doing what I was doing. And so I came back to Colorado to, I refer to it as drowning in the fountain of family, which means really kind of mooch off of them until you can figure out what your next step is. And so I was there and really, was trying to figure out where I was going and what I was going to be doing, and then our paths crossed. And what was really interesting, I thought wine called to me. I wasn't really sure in what capacity that I would find myself in the industry, but when our paths crossed, he was brewing beer in his basement and had created this whole geeky, written software, to his computer so that he could completely control mash time and temperatures and everything like that out of this little cooler. So it was this pretty high-tech setup for a cooler beer. But anyway, so he was brewing beer, he understood fermented sciences, and grew up on a farm. And as I was growing up in Colorado, the city was not where I hung out. I was hiking 14,000-foot peaks with my friends to get out of town, and so that was always a calling. So when our paths crossed and things started to evolve between us, and then we got married, it was just a decision that sitting here Saturday and Sunday and having 2 days with each other, and then him going this direction and me going this direction, and then trying to figure out how do you get a leg up in the world or whatever. And finally we just started talking about it. And I remember that he was on a business trip, and it was, so one of my parents' dear friends got us a wine club for our wedding. And we would get Oregon Pinot Noir in that shipment. And so we started drinking and kind of like investigating different wineries, and then there was that huge spread that, you know, it was like Ken Wright was in it, Doug Tennell was in it, like, and he had just gotten into the industry, like, you know, so that was very inspirational as well. I don't know that I've ever told Doug like how, wow, what an amazing story, and if he could do it, maybe we can do it. And but yeah, so there were some really incredible, but how the Willamette Valley was really like the up and coming, the cool climate viticulture that, you know, I feel is key to making beautiful wines. And anyway, yeah, and I got the magazine and I called him immediately and I was like, stay another week. He says it like, oh, it was just like, oh, it was like, no, stay another day, you know, hook up with a realtor, see what land prices are, and see if we can afford this, because, you know, this could be our next step. And that was the seed that got planted. And then everything we did over the next,
at that point it was done.
Yeah, I mean,
we were in at that point.
We were already in it, yeah. As soon as he realized, like, you know, at that time, I want to say vineyard prices were around like $4,000 an acre. And, you know, and then interestingly, he then started communicating with somebody with the tagline, wine something at Oregon. It was Scott Schull.
Yeah, it was Scott Schull. Yeah.
But what was his, so he started communicating with him because it was like Oregon wine was like his tag or something. And so he started communicating with Scott Schull, and they built this friendship from a distance.
Yeah, it's funny because I would be emailing all sorts of people, like any email I could get. And most of them, you know, like, hey, and whatever. But Scott, if you know Scott at all, he's very thorough. And I'd send him a quick little email. He sent me back a very thorough dissertation, as Scott will do. And I'm like, which is so beautiful. And I'm like, my gosh, this guy spent, you know, I asked him this question from afar in Denver. And he sends me back this very well thought out, spent time on, for somebody he didn't know. And I'm like, wow, that is amazing. So yeah, so we built this relationship, like an email relationship. And I remember when we came here, when we found this place, we went to Yamhill County Soils Department, got a soil map printed out. It showed Willackenzie soils and all this stuff at the time. It's different than that, but that's what it showed. South-facing exposure. It was Memorial Day weekend, and he was pouring at what's now the Dundee Bistro, but the Dundee Bistro was just an empty, flat concrete slab with walls at that point.
There was no restaurant, there was no kitchen, like, and you know, it was just, so they had a few winemakers that were in there pouring wines.
And we came with this thing, Scott, what do you think, you know? Here's my map, what do you think of this place? Give me the blessing that this would be great. And he's like, I'm a winemaker, man. I don't do soils. So that's when we got Kevin Chambers to like look at it. And I remember Kevin said, if you don't buy it, I will, because it's a great spot. We bought it that weekend.
But real quickly, though, what was also very interesting is that before we found this property, we found a very small piece that became kitty corner to where Bergstrom is now. And it was 14 acres, Filberts. It had a tiny little house on it. It's just above Adelsheim. And Adelsheim was just building that winery,
Just had built it,
And they had just planted the vines back up behind. And so the guy that was selling it, who was asking a lot of money for it, he said, well, go down and talk to Roland. He's down at Argyle. You know, go down there. He used to own this property. I'm sure he's got great things to say. And we went down, walked into the house, you know, and here he came up front, and he was so, I mean, everybody was so generous, right, with their time and their energy. And he sat and he says, well, kids, he says, I know what I sold that property to that guy for. He says, head west, get out of town, head west. This is where you're going to find, head west. And so that's what we did, as we started heading into the McMinnville foothills. And
if it wasn't for Lisa, we would have bought that place.
No, I didn't want it, and he wanted it because it would be closer to the airport, because he was still traveling for work. And but then when we found this, I was like, 50 acres. And not only that, but this feels like it's so much more than 50 acres because it's got these beautiful steep ravines, and you know, it was wooded. It was, I mean, definitely off the beaten path, but I think we've been able to make that work with, the energy that we put into it. And
I remember when Roland said that, he said, go west. I'm like, isn't that what they told people to go on the Oregon Trail, right? Go west, young man. I'm like, that's like got to be the thing we got to do. So, I mean, at the time when we came out here, this is now the McMinnville AVA. It was not. there were so many people like saying, "Oh, you can't grow grapes out there." It was like the next to Alaska. It's so cold out there, you can't. It's not. There's certainly in our AVA there's warmer and cooler spots, but it was definitely the frontier at that time, which I thought was kind of cool too.
Yeah.
That was one reason why we could afford it. It wasn't considered the premier spot.
The 90210
Right.
of Oregon wine industry.
Yeah.
So Mesa was just being developed. They weren't really even defined yet. Yamhill Valley obviously is the oldest winery in the area, and then Coleman Vineyard, which they were not making wine yet. Eric Hummaker and the Ponzis, I think, were taking that fruit. It wasn't like you could go, okay, so we're going to plant vines here, and you can taste a wine from next door and be like, I feel confident that our wines are going to be. So it was just like, take the dice, and roll it. But there was always such a wonderful feel about the property and the ability, kind of a clean slate. All it had ever been before was they'd run cattle. And,
they're nothing. I mean, it was pristine. And to close that loop on Scott Shull and Annie, when we moved in, we planted Rennell's block, our oldest block, in the spring of '99. And for six weekends in a row, Scott and Annie came over and helped plant that vineyard. And the Allworths came and helped also. Allworths came, and people just pitched in. And then we would help him at Harvest and Crush, so we would go over, and we, he had a little hand bottler that he was working with, and we bottled, and their destemmer was like this big. Little Zambelli. And so we would take buckets, and then we'd pass it up, and somebody'd be standing on and then they'd dump it into this little tiny destemmer, and that was how it all began. For them and for us, we made our wine that way for the first time over there in his little horse barn back behind his house. Yep. And now, I'm on the OPC board with Scott, and Annie's on the Lime Valley Wineries board with me on that, and it's pretty cool to see that we're still, all doing it. Well, and then when we finally broke ground for this, it was like they were, of course, come make your wine here, because they kept growing, obviously, and they'd bust the place at the seams, and the next thing you know is it'd be like they'd be looking for a larger spot, and I helped them find their property. So it was. We're intertwined. No doubt. Our lives are intertwined in a very deep level, but so grateful for them and for the industry. And back then I remember sitting and having a conversation with Dick Erath at some party, right? And I didn't know who he was. Didn't recognize him, the name and everything, but I remember when we were talking about, no, we're going to plant our vineyard, and it was Jerry Couchard. Couchard Vineyard? And Jerry, and so all of the old guys, it was the old school of Dundee, right? And it was some party that we had gotten invited to, and we sat there, and they were all the old guard were sitting there going, you kids want to spend your savings this way and your money this way, and every hard-earned penny this way? And it was pretty, they couldn't talk us out of it. I remember we were at an Oregon wine growers meeting once at Elber's Mill in Portland, and Myron was there. Myron got a hold of us. And Myron's Myron from Amity. And Myron's like, kids, do you know how many people get divorced in this industry? Do you really understand what you're doing? Are you insane? And I'm like, wow, this guy's calling me insane. But he couldn't talk us out of it. Myron is the best. Myron's awesome. I love Myron. Myron is like that uncle in the industry. So you have the fathers, but he's like that really great uncle, right? That knows just as much, but just approaches it and is approachable in so many lovely ways. Such a good guy. We, I think we reached out to him a lot and talked to him a lot, and Scott Shull, and it's just the guiding hand of each wave that comes, and how they help lift those that are new into the industry to find their way, and it's very lovely.
You guys were right at the time when you were kind of among the first to kind of come in from the outside and start the sort of second generation of Oregon wine. I'm curious what that means to you, and now as you're looking back, it's now been a little while. So what does it mean to you to have come in at that time?
Well, it's the only time we could have gotten into the industry, first and foremost. I think that, I'd never heard anybody say that or refer to us as the second generation, because that's an honor, really. To be a part of this industry in any way, shape, or form is such an honor. The people, the energy, the commitment, and how how lucky we are to be a part of that. And I think too, there was great learning and transformation that was happening in the industry when we came along. You know, there were people that were grafting their own vines, which I think prior to that, a lot of people were, they would purchase the vines coming in through OBS, or I know Mark Benoit, or Benoit, however they choose to pronounce it, but Mark, he was involved in bringing some of the plant material up, and but yeah, so there were sources at the time that were dabbling in grafting, and then too regarding the clones and what to plant. And I know for me, I had a strong desire to plant unrooted here, because I felt as though we were remote enough that that could be a possibility. But then Scott, you know, we did the research and kind of dove deep into not just our history, but also history of France and California, and decided that we were going to go that direction of grafting. But so to find the source of Susie Gagne, who used to be the winemaker at Airlie, and unfortunately she's no longer with us, but she was grafting. And so we would go down and spend time with her, and she would show us everything. And back in the day, this was back when classes at Chemeketa were not, you couldn't earn college credit for them. Lowell Ford, who now has a winery and a vineyard with his family, such a lovely man, I love this man. And so I just, like, of course, landed here, had no idea what I was doing, so I enrolled in like these, you know, they were Oregon wine classes, and they would bring people in to discuss viticulture, so it wasn't necessarily focused in any direction. Always wine was brought, and we would be drinking at the end of the class. He would also bring in different speakers, like Mary from Airlie. She has a great business background, and so she would come in and basically reveal, like, you know, the finances of the wine industry, which you're like, okay, wow, all right, so we're gonna have to do this. We're gonna have to do this a different way. So, anyway, it was really, and then we would go we would go prune people's vineyards. I've pruned Meredith Mitchell vineyards for free, and was over at Willamette Valley Vineyards when Joe Dobbs was the winemaker, and got to taste my first whole cluster, where they had started, they had it and they were icing it, but it had just started to ferment, so you bit into it and it was like this, you know, like a frozen wine treat of some sort, that still had some sugar in it. And anyway, that was my first opportunity to meet Joe Dobbs, and I mean, it was just, you went and you learned and you gleaned information, and people were willing to share it with you and what they were doing, and you know, being able to witness from we were all kind of like trying to figure our way together, and then what clones and what rootstocks and what would work best. And you know, so our first block, Ronell's block, was just a big experiment. And I remember Sam Tannehill telling me after it was the after party at IPNC, telling me that Riparia Galore, right, that's the rootstock to go with. Well, it's really great in the Red Hills of Dundee, but on the clays that we have out here in you know, the McMinnville AVA, I don't know that we need to devigorize the vine. I don't know that we need to have it ripen earlier. But so there's some rows of Riparia Galore, there's 10114, 3309, and then we kind of played around with all of the clones in that first block also. And anyway, and I think that set the standard as we moved forward. We were never coming in with the mindset of that, you know, we need to plant all, you know, Dijon 115 or all Pommard or, you know, Vadensville, and separating it from the blocks. We then decided that as we moved forward, we wanted to emulate what was truly unique about this site beneath the soil. So we have this beautiful diversity of soils here in our little, well, now just under 100 acres, so we've been fortunate enough to be able to buy the neighboring property, so from the original estate, but
As a second generation, I would say, and I've heard that referred to before, and I always find it like, boy, it sounds like I'm old a little bit. But what I look at that as, the guys who founded this industry had great foresight of working together, of this kind of dedication to one varietal, which is extremely unique in the New World, and to honesty and purity in wine. And I guess what I would look at as a second generation, that particular piece means to me that we need to honor what our founders have done and ensconce that mentality for future generations and make sure that we are setting a standard that continues to persist beyond. So to me, as that kind of next wave would be to take what was started as this amazing foundation and solidify it for the foreseeable future.
Sure.
So that is something that's important to me.
Sure. So let's back up a step here and talk about you've now made the purchase, you've had all the contingencies fall into place, it's Labor Day 98, you're in Oregon. What happens next?
What happens next? Like I said, we drive the U-Haul trailer, we show up here, pitch black night, coyotes howling, and a little house down at the bottom of the hill that looked a lot cuter when it had furniture in it. And so we dug in. And like I said, the first year so I remember Lisa was mentioning grafting, self-grafting. First year we called up Joel Meyer and said, Joel, he was working with Duarte Vineyard, and said, okay, I want to plant these vines in this 3 acres of Rinell's block. So we put together the order. The whole idea was kind of, I think, Pollyanna-ish a little bit, was let's get all these different clones, let's get these different rootstocks, see what works on our vineyard so we can plant the rest of it to that. We're just starting to find out now really what works probably. So, that whole idea of like, in 2 years we'll know what works. The timeline of wine is much longer than that, as I learned. But so I put this order in, and it was a big number, big dollar figure for us. These 5,000 vines or whatever we bought, and we're like, how are we going to pay for this? But I had these visions, like I remember, like thinking, like Joel says, okay, they're going to be here in a month. I'm like, this is going to be such a great day, right? This is going to be this semi truck pulling in with this, thousands of plants.
The following spring, and it's rainy.
Yeah.
And, you're walking up the hill, and there's like 10 pounds of mud on each foot, and we're prepping. So we're prepping
right?
where Rinell's block was going, and we're trying to lay out the, how the vines will be laid out, and so Scott's down at the bottom of the hill, and I'm like huffing it up to the top of the hill, and then he'd say something, and I couldn't hear him. And then I'd be like, what? So we're like yelling because it like kind of crossed and comes over. And then I'd have to like halfway walk back down to hear what he's saying. I'd be like, okay, huff back up. And, that was how we were laying it out, preparing for it.
It's funny because, and at the time we thought we were kind of like out in the middle of nowhere. And the person we bought from, they've split the property and they live across the way down the valley floor. And, wet, tired.
Well, and we had to take a tree down, so we took that down ourselves.
Some spirited people, maybe. Sometimes things, would get said, and we're thinking, we're in the middle of nowhere, no big deal. So then I remember we had dinner over at their place one night, or lunch, or maybe, and we had a vineyard guy working at that time, and he was literally just talking like this, and we could hear him like he was like across like 10 feet away. Yeah. And we're like, so you guys kind of heard all that stuff. They're like, we didn't know if you're going to make it.
And then Myron's words came resonating.
Right, here goes Myron. Spectre of Myron. So we made it though. Yeah. And, and it's still, we can see, we put together this cable to lay out the vineyard lines. And you can still see that Lisa and I did it because the rows are a little curvy, not quite all the same spacing. But it's got the most character.
Yes, it does.
So we ordered those plants from Joel, and again, I remember like it's going to be this. I'm thinking it's going to be huge, right? Like trucks, semi trucks are going to pull in. He pulls in with a field bin in the back of his pickup, dumps them off, and I'm like, okay, so where's the rest? He goes, that's it. I'm like, and they were sticks, dead looking sticks. I'm like, oh my God, how much was this? and he said, oh yeah, no problem, go stick them in the ground, they'll grow. And we're like, that's insane, they'll never grow. They were like, and they did.
Well, and it was interesting too because we spent that spring planting, and Scott and Annie came on the weekends, but we were like, every day we were like
every day.
Them, and it was really important to me that I do this mycorrhiza dip on the root system, even though I had no idea. As you walked our property, we have an abundance of wild strawberries, which is a clear sign that you have plenty of mycorrhiza in the soils. Anyway, and then we attended, they used to call it Grape Day. So we went to Grape Day, and there were this group of Frenchmen that had come from Burgundy, and they brought this gentleman with him. He's the East Indian, English-speaking translator, but he was also the doctor of viticulture at the Wine Institute in Dijon, Burgundy. And so somehow, like after the talks and everything, they would always have this really lovely dinner, and then there'd be wines people would bring to share. And we got to sit and talk with Bernard, and Bernard was in awe of the fact, and just shocked, quite frankly, that we had bought bare ground and we were developing our own vineyard here. And what a gift it was to be at our age and to be able to do this, because he said it's unheard of where he comes from. It's not possible. And so somehow, most people really love Scott when they meet him, but he fell in love.
It was you.
Anyway, so he invites us. He's like, well, you must come to the Mecca of Pinot Noir, and you must come. And I'm thinking, yeah, okay. The next day I'm like, we'd all been enjoying some wine, and, people say things. And I mean, it was later that afternoon, he emailed us and said, I've spoken to my wife, Lison, and yes, you must come, and you must stay with me. And the next thing you know is we had booked so it was in September, so it was right before their Harvest and Crush, and we booked a flight and put it on the credit card. And we went to Burgundy to see him, and it was almost like when he was because he was going to pick us up from the train station. It's like, are we going to remember what he looks like? I remember that. I was like, do you remember what he looks like? But anyway, and Bernard is such a lovely soul,
such a good guy.
An incredible human being. So he picks us up. Takes us off to his home, his lovely wife Lison, and each night she would cook these incredible either French meals or East Indian meals, and because he was part of the Wine Institute, they make wine every year, and so he had the cellar, and he would dive down and he'd pull bottles, and then we would come up and have the most beautiful conversations about wine, about viticulture. He was doing a lot of research, like at Volnay-Lafarge, and he was doing research for Domaine Drouin, for homeopathy, or experiments with silica in the vineyard and biodynamic research at the time. So he would send us off, and we would go wander and do our own thing, and then we would meet him back around 2, 3, and he would have set up some special. So we come walking into Domaine Drouin, and Veronique, right before Harvest and Crush, right? They're really busy. Veronique comes and goes, yes, come, and we go down into to their massive cellars under the entire town of Beaune. And there's a wall there that's 1,000 years before Christ, and
the Romans
and
built
there's these massive tours happening. And here we are, little old us, being treated like royalty, like we were, I don't know.
Veronique was amazing.
And then she pulled bottles because she wanted to give us a clear picture of all of the coats. So she would say, would you like to taste? And it was like, so she opened up 6 bottles of wine. We tasted them, and then she sent them with us, and she spent, it was just such a gift. And then the following day it was at Volnay-Lafarge, and we got to sit there and look at 1, 2, 3, I think it was 4 generations, 4 generations of winemakers. That you walk into the garage, you go upstairs, that's their home. You take the elevator down, and it's the cellars, and it's like this black, dark, musky smelling where all the wine is aged, and then also to tour their vineyards because of the homeopathy or the biodynamic research that was occurring there as well. And it was such a gift and such an eye-opener. So you have to understand, we had just left here with 10 pounds of mud on each foot as we're huffing up and down the hill, planting these sticks that I was like, I don't know if these are ever going to grow. Are these? And we had just our last money went to that. In fact, while we were in Europe, we ran out of money, and we went to go use something, and we ran out of money. And I remember Scott's like, no, my paycheck is due to be deposited, so it's
tomorrow,
so we're okay. So I remember we took what little money we had in our pocket, and at this point we'd kind of popped over to Italy on a train. We had our backpacks and stuff, and I remember just going into the store, and we picked a baguette, we got a bottle of wine, we got some salami.
With the cash that we had.
Yeah, with what little cash we had, and then we hopped on the train to go back to Bernard's house, because he was he loved us so much. He was like, well, when you come back through, you must stay, even if it's just a night,
And he had moved.
Yeah, he'd moved houses.
In between.
But he still was just like, come. And I remember that was the night he made his special tandoori chicken for us. That was amazing, yeah. But, and then I came back, so like, it's like,
we can do it.
Oh my gosh, we can totally do this. And what a gift. And of course they're going to grow, right? And so it was just this, you were able to bathe in the heritage and the ancient song of the vine in Burgundy that just sang so bright in my heart when I came back here to our own property. And I remember how
that was amazing.
It was very refreshing to come back and you looked at things through a different lens at that point.
Yep.
Once you'd established your vineyard here, had you always intended to have a winery? Was it always the intent to have what you have now, or did you kind of come to that step by step?
I'd say yes, and it's funny, we used to walk around the property a lot when there was nothing. It was just,
when we had no money.
No
we
money.
couldn't afford to go out to dinner, so we would, and the house was really hot, it had no insulation. So I'd pack a picnic bag, and then we'd bring some wine, and we would huff it all the way from the bottom of the hill. And this was, none of this was here. The pond wasn't here, the vines weren't here, this wasn't here. And we would go sit up in the trees up over on this hill and look to the right and say, I think I could see a winery over here. And wouldn't it be really lovely to have a pond over there? And and it was really quite incredible that you only can truly understand when you've had that lengthy time period that the wine industry always seems to offer you. To see things come to fruition, right?
Yeah, and it's there. We'd sit up on the hill up there and say, yeah, the winery, and well, that's where the winery is. And look at that little kind of area over there. It looks like a perfect spot for a pond. And Lisa mentioned grafting. We grafted all our own vines after the original block from that. We learned how to graft from Susie, who was an amazing person. But we needed a source to water them because we'd plant them green growing. So we put the pond in and irrigated those original vines off of that. And there's going to be a block here and a block here, and that's the way it is now. And it's pretty amazing. It's interesting is that it's that long years, but or long days but short years kind of idea, where the days would be very long sometimes. Like, is this ever going to get done? And then you look back 20 years later, it seems like it's kind of flashed by, and you look out and it's kind of here, which is neat.
And it makes me think of too, just like when we first bought the property. I remember being down in the little house, and if the time wasn't being spent outside kind of prepping, the time was inside the house to make it more enjoyable for us. And I remember hearing a knock on the side of the door, and I opened it up, and it was Jimmy Brooks. And Jimmy had been helping out over at Maysara, and he was like, gosh, do you know who bought this property? He goes, because I had my eye on it for the longest time, and do you know, it looks like they're developing it into vineyard. And I was like, well, yes, that's me. So I threw on some boots and we went and walked the land with Jimmy, and then when Jimmy was solidified over at Maysara, he would invite us over, and it was like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. They'd have the ATVs, and we would just like zip all over that property and up the steep hills and back to see the big, I think it's more of a lake than a pond, but and I remember going back and spending time there, and then we also were spending time checking out their grafting operation to then Eric Hammaker and Eric Lemelson. So we had been to a party at one point where Eric Hammaker had sat next to us, and he was like, wow, I love the McMinnville AVA. And he was like, can I set up an appointment to bring a friend over and come take a look at your land? And I was like, yeah. He brought Eric Lemelson with him. So that the four of us are walking the property, and it was like, they were like, well, you should take this hillside back here and build a winery into that hillside. And the whole conversation, and then it was like, and you should plant every hillside here. And Scott's like, well, what would you farm that with? And he goes, oh, a crawler. But so all I'm hearing is just dollar signs. Like, okay, yeah.
Your guys' perspective might be a little different than ours.
Right. But either way, it's...
We done it.
Yeah, it's ours, and it's our style, and I think that I love the diversity of the clones within the blocks, because for me it's more about really emulating the beauty of the diversity of the soils here. And we do bottle 4 of the blocks separately, and when you release them, there are these nuances that clearly define they're different tasting wines. same general oak profile, same winemaker, same vintage, but these little nuances that come through in a different way that just, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to really, because the geology and the beauty, how some sites are more vigorous and some sites are a little more devigorizing to the vine. I think it's a really beautiful tour through the wine, through the varietal of Pinot Noir. Right?
Yeah, we have volcanic, we have sedimentary soils, we've got all of these differences, elevations, exposures. We have this. It's not this kind of hillside. It's undulating, and it's got Abby's block is different than Tallulah's, and it's amazing. And the way we farm it, we farm it organically. We try to be, I guess, minimally handling things as much as we can. I'd say we're fairly intense in the vineyard from making sure that we're allowing it to grow well, and then minimally handling in the winery, so that what we're trying to do is transcend that place into the bottle. And what's cool is, like, you have Brunel's block, and even though the vintages are clearly different vintages, you can see that line run through that it's Brunel's block. It has a signature that goes through every year. Sarah Jane's, Tallulah's, Abbey's, same thing. And it's amazing to taste like verticals and horizontals, right? You taste like a cross vintages of a single block, and you can tell it's the same thing with different kind of nuances to it. Or you do a horizontal of a vintage across the different blocks. You can tell it's the same year, but you can tell they all have their individual personality. And it's really cool. It's really amazing. Pinot Noir is singular in that way, that it shows that. And that's the beauty of Pinot.
I was just going to ask, what is it about Pinot to you that is so captivating?
Well, it's nuanced, it's subtle, it shows its place, it shows how it was grown. It's interesting, I've never made any other red wine. Well, I guess I've made Syrah from here too. But I mean, Pinot Noir is what I've made. We came here, we started growing it and started making it, learning from neighbors like Steve and Carrie, helping, kind of get ideas of how it works for McMinnville AVA to handle it. I remember the first wine I made off this property, it was unbelievably undrinkable and tannic and monstrous. And so we figured out minimally addressing our wines are best. Pinot Noir, it's about that time and place. It's about that it shows through in the bottle how it was handled, in the cellar how it was handled. And our wine, you can't make Coeur de Terre wine anywhere else but here. And that's a beautiful thing that, I love, beautiful wines from all these different Pinot Noirs and different expressions, but you can't have that singular Coeur de Terre wine except from here. And that's a beautiful thing. And that's what Pinot Noir does.
And to me, I think that for Pinot Noir, it is the expression of the feminine from the earth. All of the characteristics and qualities of Pinot Noir are so beautifully feminine, and I think that that's the draw to it. Is that a good Pinot Noir reveals itself to you very slowly, and there's different styles of femininity, right? I know that Ken Wright talks about Marilyn Monroe and Audrey Hepburn, right? But it's this feminine expression from the earth that I just think is such a gift, and differences between where it's grown, how it's made, but still I think it always holds that truly feminine quality. Yeah.
You mentioned farming organically and sustainably. I'm curious, what brought you down the path of organic, sustainable farming?
Lisa did.
Yeah, I'm a tree hugger from Colorado, spending my time hiking 14 peaks, and to be here and to be a part of this human experience in this setting is such a true gift. And so if you don't take care of it, right? And so, and it's been, from the onset, we were organic. I know that at times we would continue to spray Roundup as needed, but we've now shifted completely away even from glyphosate, which we have to start making evolutionary choices. And it can't come down to, the bottom line. It has to come from a standpoint that we've got to take care of what we've got, because if we're not going to do it, then it's not going to be there. It'll certainly change into something that may not be as beautiful of an experience to be a part of. And so, and I love, now I've kind of dove down this whole rabbit hole with, there's a gentleman in McMinnville who I I worked with to help put in native gardens at like our little Montessori school in McMinnville. And so I've been going into the forest now and kind of rehabilitating the forest, the oak savannas, trying to find that beautiful diversity, trying to keep the blackberries at bay. And the Doug fir obviously are something that maybe over time we'll have to start moving away from because of their shallow root system in general, but looking to get some of those out that have gone to drought. We've lost to drought conditions, but there's stewardship of the land that I think you take the responsibility of when you step into being a quote unquote farmer, and anybody who wants to look at this any differently. It's so glamorous. It's like, no, it's farming. It's definitely farming. And so being able to step in and take that responsibility of being a good steward, I think is important.
Yeah, when I was a kid in Minnesota, there wasn't a chemical you couldn't throw at something to take care of it, right? And I can tell you at that time, farmers weren't doing that in Minnesota like, boy, let's just make money. It was, they thought it was the best thing. And at the time, they were doing what their best ideas of what they thought were good for the soil. There's no better environmentalist than a farmer, because they live their land. Their land is their source of livelihood, and there's nobody closer to it. But my perspective back in the day, in the 70s was, there's atrazine. Boy, that stuff you can get rid of your weeds. Spray that. It's really bad stuff. And we've learned. So I've evolved through the help of
Sometimes pulling them by we're here now.
Yep.
Yeah,
and it does. It actually, by growing organically, it does allow that transparency of the place to come through better too. And it allows the fact that the more you manipulate, the more you add, the more that's going to show, because Pinot Noir is transparent. And the less you add, it shows more of that place and that what it is. So it's been very good for the winemaking, no doubt about it.
So to follow up on that, what does it mean to you what does sustainable farming mean to you? What does it mean to you to make wine sustainably?
So sustainable to me is a term that is exceedingly broad, and it means something different to everybody. To me, sustainable means looking at it as a whole ecosystem, not as sustainable means we don't spray Roundup. That's not what it means to me. It means this whole ecosystem that we're creating here, which goes certainly the plants and the farming, but to the people. Making sure that the people that are here are treated respectfully and are treated in a manner that they can be sustainable in their lives. That we tell the truth so that our story is sustainable, that our place can be here better than when we came. And it's just this, and I think all of that, I'm not a biodynamic guy, but I do think all of that stuff resonates together, which is tripping very closely to the biodynamic thing, right?
I'm a believer in biodynamics.
Yeah. All of that does resonate together and does come through in the final wine, which again is that dynamism, that idea of that intentionality does show, and I think that's true. So it's a very broad thing to me, and I think I look at it as when you make decisions that you have to really not just thinking about I'm going to do this to get that, but you got to think about that, the butterfly effect and that whole kind of ramifications that happens of when I do something, when I walk in my vineyard, I am creating an event that does something. When I drive a tractor, we're doing something. So try to think about that ramification on this more holistic scale. And
consequences and unintended consequences as well.
Yeah.
With your choices and
kidding myself if I think I know all of it, but trying to think of it in a whole perspective I think helps to get to that point of maybe understanding at some point. And the more we learn, I think the less I know. So I don't know.
I agree with that. I think that each season that reveals itself, it's that there's such a beautiful lesson of humility in the wine industry. and you have to acquiesce to, Mother Nature in so many ways. And I think that's been such, at least for me, an incredible gift that's been given, is that lesson of humility and stepping out of the knowing and stepping into the unknown. I think is also a really beautiful place to be.
Yeah, it's one thing I hope our kids can learn, is that you do the best you can, but at sometimes, things happen, and that you have to be able to adjust, and don't try to fight things, but try to go with them and work with them, versus I'm going to bend this to my will, of let's work together to get to the place where we all should be. I think it's a good lesson. It's a lesson that farming and wine teaches, there's no doubt about it.
Yes.
We don't gauge things by what happened this quarter. We gauge things by decades, I think.
Yeah, so, from a business perspective, I don't know that our model is the one to follow by any means. But I think that we always used our hearts to follow the direction that we needed to go. And if that meant that, you're giving somebody a raise, but you're taking out of your own pocket to do that, that is the sustainability of what we do at Coeur de Terre, is making sure that everybody is taken care of. Because I too believe wholeheartedly that it ends up in the finished product, and it ends up with the overall. I think it just resonates out, and then it comes back to you in such wonderful ways. And that's one thing that I think that is it's an important thing that we need to look at as an industry as a whole. Yeah.
Yep.
So let's talk about the business side of the industry, everyone's favorite topic to talk about. You talked about kind of learning it at Chemeketa, or kind of getting the general crazy business plan of wine there. As you started down your path, what were the challenges you had to deal with when it came to business? Was it business of wine?
So there's a rule of three in the wine industry, I'm convinced. From my experience, there's a rule of three. So when Scott and I decided that we were going to do this, and Scott's a really smart guy, right? And so we ran numbers and everything, and it was well, if we sell this and then we buy this, and yes, the house is not necessarily the greatest thing, but you have to figure once we get this up and once the vines come in, we'll have this much money coming in, and then we can fix the house up, or we can build a new house. And but what I realized is everything is multiplied by 3. So you take the amount of money that you thought it was going to cost, and you multiply that by 3. And this is annual. It's not in the big scheme of things. I'm guessing we've spent a lot more than times 3 in what we've,
Most
if you
likely.
compact, or if you add up everything that we spent in the full, 20 plus years that we've been here. If you think it's going to take a certain amount of time, take that time frame and multiply it by 3. If you think a job that you're going to do, we'll dig this pond, it'll take us, a couple of weekends, take that, multiply it by 3, and that's actuality. So that's my opinion on it.
Yeah, no, I think it's absolutely true. So from the business perspective, the only way we could have done this is we did it through sweat equity. And this is a little bit of my mentality. It's my Scottish nature.
Which means he's cheap.
And which means I'm cheap.
But also we couldn't afford it anyway. So.
Right. We had no choice.
It was a great mind to have on the team, right?
And I have this idea that, we can do these things ourselves. So that's what led to grafting. Why did we graft the vines ourselves? To start with, we started with it because vines cost $3.50 a piece. You're putting in $1,500 to $1,800 an acre. Do the math over 40, it's a lot of dollars. Susie Gagne said, no, I can show you how to graft. And she showed me her little greenhouse and this little grafting machine she had, this amazing grafting machine from Germany. It's such a perfect German piece of equipment.
Grafter, yeah.
And she said, you can do this. So I built a greenhouse. We put in all this beautiful bottom heat. And the first year, we grafted 10,000 vines. And about 90% of them took that we planted. So Sarah Jane's block was planted all by vines that we grafted ourselves for about 87 cents a piece. And it was a big number. That's wow. So to me, that's a good explanation of how we did this was we could have gone, normally spend $3.50 a plant, but we took that and now we were able to put in trellis because we saved the money on the plants. And that's how we were able to bootstrap that into planting this place, doing it ourselves. And what was cool about that is it originally started as we were saving money. But what turned out is I was reading this book called Great Domains of Burgundy. It's a really cool book. And I'm hoping I got that name right, because I think that's what it is. That's what's in my mind. But it's a review of 100 different domains in Burgundy. And it would talk about very in depth about their winemaking and their viticulture practices. And everybody said, before phylloxera, we used to do Massal selection, which basically is you look at your plants that are growing well in your place, you cut them off, stick them in the ground, and that's how you create the rest of your vineyard. And we were very much at that time, it was all about clones. Everyone was talking about clones of Pinot Noir. And, Dijon clones were getting big back then. And everyone was talking about that, and we were starting to plant by clone. And then I was reading all this Massal selection. I'm like, you know what? We can just take cuttings of our vines and plant them in our vineyard. We don't have to be saying like all 115 is the same. We can look at this from the old world perspective of Massal selection, look at those plants that are doing well, propagate them through the rest of our vineyard. So that's what we did. From that point forward, we had this kind of, I think of as an epiphany, was let's look at the plants that are doing well, irregardless of what they are in clone, and cut those, graft them, put them into the new blocks. And that way what we're getting is this kind of heterogeneity in the block, this wide range of clonal material that's doing well here. And we're getting that kind of throughout the entire vineyard, is this kind of Massal selection. So when you taste a wine that's different from Abby's block, it's not because of the clone, it's because of the place. Because the clones are all these kind of weird mishmash stuff that we liked throughout these vineyard blocks. So that's what you're tasting, is place, not clone.
Sure.
So the challenge with that, though, is occasionally we'll have some, because we also grafted some Gruner Veltliner, which our Gruner Veltliner that we grafted ended up at Rafter Ridge's vineyard. So if you've tasted their Gruner Veltliner, and then we had some Riesling, but you would occasionally will have, a Riesling plant, like when it finally comes to fruit, you'd have a Riesling plant or two or a few interspersed. And so, but I mean, it was our way. It was what we did. It was our choice at the time, and I think I would still stick with that. I don't know that I would change it. Yeah. And the other downside is that you're not this. We weren't in a position where you could just go boom, slam 40 acres in the ground, and then you're well on your way. And like in 5 years, you're a well-known winemaker, being written up in Wine Spectator, all of these things. We were really slow on the scene because we only made wine from the fruit that there was the very first year before we had fruit come on, that we purchased some fruit from Murto Vineyard.
That didn't turn out
well. But we made I think we made a barrel, right? It was a barrel wine. Yeah. And so we did that once, but aside from that, we only ever made wine from our own vineyard up until, 2008, 2009. 2009 was the first year that we, so from 2002 to 2009, it was all just what we grew. And then what the next block that would come online. And so it's been a slow game for us. Once again, that humility and the lesson in patience, right? But I don't know that I would have done it any differently.
No.
I think,
what I love about it is we plant every vine ourselves. We put in every bit of trellis. This is our place.
Yeah. I mean, with all of the beautiful people that also are a part of Coeur de Terre and have been a part of Coeur de Terre, that's the other thing, is their family. Whether they, our longest time employee was 14 years, and usually when they leave, they're leaving to go back home. They want to go back home. They want to spend time with family. Apparently, women here are not good. They're not as good as the women at home. So anyway,
I've had them a couple times.
Either way, it's been wonderful to see the people and just continue to stay in touch with them. And we've never viewed people as seasonal. In fact, that put us in the red a lot of the time, because we knew they had rent to pay. We knew they had families to pay. So it wasn't like, oh, you finished picking, well, we're done with you. We would then try to find things for them to do during the winter, so there could be some consistency, but then also the beauty of longevity. And that's how you treat a family member. So you sacrifice to help them, and then in turn, when the season is really hard and it's 14, 15, 16-hour days, then they're sacrificing to help us. And so
looking out for us.
Yeah.
I mean, our folks look out for us. There's no doubt about it.
No, for sure. So.
It's really cool. Yeah, so one thing about in the development of it, I just want to bring, like, when we first moved in here, Lisa, she grew up in the city and I grew up on a farm, and the house was very meager, and I said, Lisa, I promise you in 4 years, based on that business plan, we'll be able to build a house. It'll be awesome. It's going to be great. So about 5 years in, we did it. We had enough money. I said, you know what? We've stowed away enough money, and we could build a house, or we could, and at the time we were making wine at some other folks' places, or we could build a winery. And Lisa said, we came here to make wine, we should build a winery. So in 2004, we built this place. And
downstairs was finished, or as finished as it could be, ready for crush. This wasn't finished up here for another 2 years.
But it was amazing to me. It's like, you know what, that's like how we're a team, right? It's like, it's like build a winery. Not, it wasn't about her, it was about that, and that was pretty amazing. I'll never forget that. 12 years later, 15 years later, we built a house, right?
Times 3.
Times 3.
Just do the math.
What about selling wine? How was it when you actually had a product to sell? How did that work?
I remember
we were so small. It was so easy. Like, I don't know how long you've been here, but Red Fox Bakery used to be and was created by Jason and Lori Furch. And it's crazy because I had just had our youngest daughter, who's now 16, Abby. And I remember, Scott, it was Valentine's Day maybe.
Maybe.
And you were like, let's go out to the coast. And so we stayed at this nice resort for one night.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And he was giving me a break, so he got up really early with Abby so that I could sleep in. And he went to some place for coffee, and this was a place that Lori and Jason
in Lincoln City.
In Lincoln City. And so anyway, when they finally got into the town and the community, well, somehow the conversation was, we're thinking about moving to McMinnville. So they came, they created this incredible bakery, best bread, best everything. So they had invited us. They were like, well, come down and pour your wine out of our bakery. And I remember doing that. And one of the most beautiful people is, of the wine industry, who unfortunately is no longer with us, is Bryce Bagnall. Bryce was this, I miss him. I miss his energy. He had a lightness of him and laughter. And I remember we were pouring down at the bakery. And this was after he'd already had his diagnosis, and he was it was affecting him physically. So he had this really cool, wheelchair that could stand him up a little bit. And but he saw our sign. Apparently he had dinner reservations at Nick's. He saw our sign, took a left, came in to see us. And he was like, oh, I had to come in here and taste your wine. And I remember that was the thing. I remember him asking us, is like, well, so how do you plan on selling this?
Well, like, right here.
But so in the beginning it was relatively easy because we had very few cases to sell. And there was somebody, I remember, having Abby, baby, on the hip down in the Love Shack at the bottom of the hill. And you were gone, you were out of town, but I remember you calling me, right? And he's like, okay, so I just got a call from these 2 guys, they're at the Linfield football game, but they've heard about our wine, and they want to come and taste. And I was like, so I'm like running around trying to clean the kitchen. I had to get dressed, in something that was like, not mom gear. I had to got the baby on the hip the whole time, and they came in and I poured wine for them, and they ended up being some longtime customers of ours. And I think he bought something, and then it was Lloyd Town, who owns a quarry, and we needed rock for the road, and so we negotiated this trade. Then we didn't have to pay. He took wine, and then he gave us rock for our road. And I mean, I don't know if it still happens that way these days, but I mean, that's kind of how it happened.
We just started selling, and then I remember we got our first distributor in Oregon, and I thought, distribution, everyone gave these horror stories, hard to find and all this. So I called up, I said, I called these guys up, Lemma Wine Company at the time, and he said, I'll be there tomorrow. So try your wines out. And he signed us up that day. I'm like, this distribution thing, it's easy.
Well, no, but it was for a little while, because we would have distributors come in these doors and come walking in, and they'd be, hey,
Sign you
I'm
up.
from Georgia, and I'm starting a distributor.
Right.
And I'd be like, yeah, great, all right. And we'd sign up, and they'd sell a lot of wine for us. And so there was a time when and then it kind of sets the, at least that's what you think is, this is going to be easy. And then I don't know if it's the industry that shifted or the reality of the industry finally hit us, but Yeah, it is work, and just because you make it, they do not necessarily just come.
Yep.
And so that's where you have to shift, and you have to, pivoting really is more like it. You have to pivot to not only be able to embrace all of the beauty of why we got into this industry, which was the farming. It's Scott's creative outlet in regards to the winemaking, the relationships that we have here, and then you have to pivot into this mindset of, selling wine.
That's when it becomes a business.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
See, once again, this is not a business model you want to follow, right? It's like,
but I mean, so the key is we're also really trying to develop direct sales here and creating a good experience for people to come out to. I think we're doing I think when people come out here, it's very educational, so we try to spend a lot of time talking about why Pinot Noir, why is it special, why these blocks, why does it come through. So that's definitely a focus, is making sure that we get people out here. It is a little bit of a lift. It's down a gravel road, but I really do think it's something special and unique. We're not a tasting room that's on the next one down the line. People come out here, they want to see something different. We try to have educated folks working here who have the love of the place too.
yeah, that's one thing that I think too is just the people that we've been fortunate enough that they've come and knocked on our door, and then we've been fortunate enough to see how wonderful they are to bring them on board, and the gifts that they bring individually, and then allowing them to shine in their own light. And I think that's kind of the challenge from the business side, is that trying not to micromanage it. And that was probably the hardest thing for me, because this is our blood and sweat, and so wanting things to be done a certain way, but then realizing over time the beauty of stepping back and allowing people to shine and do what they do, and to impart what they do in their own way, as long as the story is shared, and the authenticity still remains. And so we've just been very fortunate with the people that have been interested in joining our family.
Sure.
And
Yep, no doubt.
So let's talk about the name Coeur de Terre, as my bad pronunciation goes there. And where did that come from?
You want to tell a story?
I'll tell you. So we originally were going to call ourselves, or define ourselves, as Lone Oak Farm, which is the farm that Scott grew up on in Minnesota. And so we were going to transfer that name here. And as you're driving up, there is that one lone oak that you see off to the left that really is quite picturesque. It's spread out, it's beautiful. And it was interesting, because every time we would go to a dinner party in the wine industry or go hang out amongst our peers, the advice was constantly, you need to license, trademark, license, trademark, license, trademark. And finally, we were getting to the point where we were moving toward label.
She's being kind.
And Scott had put it on the very, very back burner. It might have fallen off the stove, right?
Yeah.
And anyway, so he finally moved forward to doing the licensing and the trademarking, and come to find out, Mondavi, just like a few months prior.
3 weeks.
Yeah. Oh, was it 3 weeks?
Yep.
So 3 weeks earlier had licensed and trademarked the name Lone Oak. And so we were waiting for the branch to hit us, or the strike of lightning, like, okay, how will we move forward and define ourselves? So when we dug the pond, it was interesting, because we brought in Matt Peel to give us a bid on what it would cost to dig the pond. And I remember we were in Canada at the time, and anyway, so he gave us this bid that I think it was something like $25,000 or something.
That's what it was.
And and then Scott said, tell me this is Canadian. Apparently
the exchange rate was high.
was in our favor at the time. And he said, no, it's 25. And so at that point, being the good Scottishman that he is, there was a place called Mac Rental in town that you could call them up, and they would deliver a massive excavator down to your door. And as the guy's getting out of his big truck and backing it off and tossing you the keys, saying, do you need a crash course? And it's like, yeah, how do you start it? But then he would drive it up, and he dug this pond that looked more like a crater. But that was our pond for a while, right? And still waiting for the, what is the lightning? What's, how are we going to define ourselves? And so at some point I was going to extend Rennell's block up. And so there was a rock that used to stick out of the ground about this far. So, of course we start digging at it, and digging and digging and digging. And finally I'm like, this thing is connected to the center of the earth. But when you sat on it, it was this massive rock, right? When you sat on it, it was in the shape of a heart. So I was like, well, look at this. This is in the shape of the heart. And it was like, how beautiful this is. And I don't think that we had defined ourselves as of yet. Still.
No.
And then we had a friend come over who knew there's a skill and an art to throwing dirt. But so he's one of these skilled and artful, people. And he came and he was like, are you ever concerned that your dog might fall? Not be able to
It was
get
like
out?
sheer cliff.
It was like, I could come up and I could bring my machine, like we could taper the edges off a bit and make it look more natural. And you're like, great. So when he was coming, it was Don Razoo, I said to Scott, and as he listens, as I've realized, like he's got this list, we have this listening communication, it's whatever the dance is that we go into regarding this, that sometimes we hear things, sometimes we don't, sometimes we heard it this way. But I said to him, like, listen, be sure he doesn't dig the rock up, like leave the rock. So, and apparently the translation got lost or,
I forgot.
So Don came and he was digging the pond and then he messages Scott or calls him and says, hey, and I saw you guys are trying to dig this rock out. So I flipped it up and he goes, what do you want me to do with it? And Scott's like, put it back.
I was like, don't move. Because we're going to put it right back how it was.
So anyway, he flipped it out, but the cool thing about it is that when he flipped this massive boulder out of the earth, it's in the shape of a heart from two different directions. And so it sits down by the pond, and I think it's one of the best places in Oregon to kiss, but did not make the book. But anyway, so then that's when we started looking at how does this define us, and kind of decided to go with the French version of Heart of the Earth. And that we feel it's not only just representative of, the rock and the story, but it's the good stewardship of the land, and so that's our namesake. And I love it because, it fully represents what's happening here within this now just under 100 acres, and we absolutely love what we do. And
When I saw that thing, and I got that call, I remember I was right up on the top of the hill, and I can picture it in my mind because it was I was in such fear when I heard it. Scott, I got that rock out for you. What do you want me to do? I'm like, oh my God, don't move. So I'm running down the hill, and I see it, and it's a heart-shaped boulder, and I'm like, I am clearly the luckiest man on the planet right now, because I go to Lisa and look what I did. It's perfect. It's this heart-shaped rock. But at that time, it's like, I looked at that there's something else going on. I've been lucky in my life, but I'm not that lucky. There was something else going on, that this heart-shaped boulder came out of the earth that should have been cracked into a million pieces. But it's this heart-shaped boulder that is base of volcanic soil crusted with sedimentary soil, that is a heart shape, that is this beautiful abstract design that is so representative of everything we're doing that cannot just be by chance. So
yeah,
that's awesome. That's one of the better winery name stories we've ever heard, I have to tell you. That's pretty awesome. So tell me what it means, what a wine labeled Oregon or Willamette Valley means to you. Oh,
it means everything. I think that, Oregon, what is happening in, and at least for me in the Willamette Valley, because I know there's varietals that are being grown that are differently, but what's happened in the North Willamette Valley and the Willamette Valley, to me there's a handful of places that you can grow Pinot Noir well. And I'm not going to say that one place is better over the other, and it's not to say that there are other areas in the world that they're starting to produce nice wines, but I think that we live in such a great area of not just being able to produce phenomenal, cool climate driven, even with the change in climate, we still get these really beautiful, cool climate influences on our wines without having to go to great lengths of elevation or take it in so close to the coast that you're on these super steep slopes. And so I think that, you know, that's what it means. It means that there's a history of the integrity that's gone into, you know, all the way from David Lett determining that this was the varietal that you could grow here, Pinot Noir. Not to say that, I mean, I do believe that Pinot Noir is our benchmark varietal and will continue to be our benchmark varietal. And not to say that there aren't other varietals that people can't pursue, but, and I don't know, that's, to me, it's like quality Pinot Noir that comes with great integrity and great dedication, being the most difficult varietal to grow. So it does take dedication and the humility to surrender to the time that it takes for it to really come into its own. Even not just to mention the time from when you plant to when you have that bottle to sell, you know, which is, you know, 4 to 5 years for full crop. To, you know, if you put it in barrel for 18 months, you bottle it, it's got to sit for a little while to settle into itself and weave itself back together. You know, it's that time that we come back to again. But you know, it's also the longevity of how long it takes for really the vine to tap into its true essence, which I know Ken Wright and several other winemakers refer to it as the mother rock, but it's like that, its true essence, and that takes time for it to really become truly defined as what it's going to be once it taps into its true essence from the earth. And with that, then it finds its beauty and its femininity, and yeah.
The Willamette Valley, there's nowhere else on the planet that grows wine like we do. You cannot reproduce this anywhere else, and that's a little bit of that idea of being able to preserve what our founders started is very much true. Oregon is at a bit of a crossroads right now. We are growing up. We have other influences coming in. We have other people, you know, taking our grapes to other places and making our wine. It is absolutely incumbent upon us to preserve that quality, that history, and what has made Oregon what it is. And that is, in the Willamette Valley, there is nowhere else on the planet like this, and we need to preserve that with all of our might. So we luckily stumbled in 1998 into this area, and without knowing what we were getting into and how lucky we were. And now it's our job to preserve that. And hopefully our wines show that. Hopefully our wines show that Willamette Valley, that spirit in that. And that's one of my goals, is that comes through.
Of other varietals, you mentioned earlier Syrah. Tell me about you have a cool climate Syrah program. Tell me about how that came about.
So how that came, I'm going to tell that story. It was in 2004, 3 maybe. So Lisa talked about our Georgia distributors. We had our Georgia distributor, and she went and worked the market. And she came back after, I guess, went to a retailer who had a bunch of Côte Rôtis open. Côte Rôtis, basically Syrah with a little Viognier. This is how they typically do it, Northern Rhone. She comes back from this trip from Atlanta and says, "We're planting Syrah." I'm like, "Did you not get the memo? We grow Pinot Noir here. We don't grow Syrah in the Willamette Valley." And I was staunchly against it. I'm like, "Are you kidding me? What am I going to do when it doesn't get ripe? Because we're a cool climate." And very Pinot Noir focused. But we talked about it, and so eventually I came around and said, "All right, fine, we'll plant Syrah. We'll go ahead and do it. And if we're going to do it, we're going to try to do it right. We're going to do it in a Côte Rôtis-ish style." So there were the Duvert, Mike and Patty Green.
Duvert Vineyard, which they've been here a long time, and we called up Mike and asked him if he had, flailed in, if he pruned his vineyard yet, and if he'd flailed yet, and he said, "Nope, it's all there on the ground." And because they had Syrah, I think that Sam Tannehill used to get it. And
he might still.
Yeah, maybe so.
Yeah.
But anyway, we went over, we cleaned up their vineyard floor, bundled it all in, kind of kept it back behind the barn until it was ready to graft, and we created plants from it and got it in the ground. We also got a little bit of Viognier, so there's like a couple of rows of Viognier mixed in with the Syrah. And it's interesting because I think as much as Scott dug his heels in on it, there was a lot of morning coffee arm wrestling going on over whether or not to do this. And I think that it's become one of his favorite wines.
It's actually, so it's ridiculous, right? So it's kind of annoying, right, when your wife's always right. So
I don't know about that.
but she was right. I mean, so it started out 2009, amazing. That was our first vintage of that wine. And it was this just lean iron and kind of this almost kind of animally blood quality to it, which is just so cool. And it turned out great. And then we started making our rosé using Syrah and Pinot Noir, which is like crazy. I remember somebody said it was, you're just bastardizing rosé. I'm like, okay, you're a real rosé purist.
I thought rosé wasn't that.
Right, exactly.
Right? Like, didn't you pretty much put anything into rosé? So.
Yeah. So, but it creates this rosé, which is amazing because it has this kind of spice. And one thing I love about wine is to me, it takes you back to places. And my mom, I grew up on a farm in Minnesota. We had rhubarb plants growing out in the back, and strawberry rhubarb pie was a thing that she'd make. She made the best pie crust. And it always reminds me of that because it's got this strawberry tone from the Pinot. It's got this savoriness of the rhubarb that comes out in that, and it takes me back to when I was a kid, and I love that. To me, that is one of the things that's one thing wine can do, is it can transcend you to your mind thinking of stuff of the past and where you've been, and that's a powerful thing. So it has this amazing spirit in that rosé. And then the Syrah is lean and iron and just really cool. I mean, really savory.
It's acid driven, and I think that was the beauty of when you think about Syrahs, you're thinking of these typically the experience is these high alcohol, super kind of jammy, fruity wines grown in these extremely hot regions. But if you did pull it and put it into a cool climate viticulture, then it's going to have those lovely cool climate aspects, that the nuance of the acid, but you'll still receive that pepper and the spice that's there. But the acid, which then in turn makes it so primed to age. And then as you age, so these Côte Rôties that I was tasting were very old, and it was the fairy tale in the bottle. So you open it up, and as the wine is allowed to open and you're enjoying it, I mean, it's like the sweaty horse, riding through the wet forest, right, and the moss, and then the wet leather, right, that is coming off of the saddle. And to me, so you get all these earth components, and so I mean that was the nuance. I came back with that fairy tale still, in my heart, and said, I think we could do something like this. Hopefully, I'll be able to live long enough for those wines that have been produced to be able to taste them in that state where they're ready to share the fairy tale, right?
Yep. So I've taken this as completely on my own now. We're expanding that block. We're adding Syrah. I'm all in. It's now my idea.
That's a wise woman. Next time her man think that it was his idea.
Right.
So let's go back a little bit to, we were talking about earlier, you mentioned not heeding Myron Redford's advice to not get into the industry together. How have you made it work, working together, being married, living here over the years? What's your secret?
Oh, there's no
master
secret.
of burning the wick at both ends and not burning out, I think, has been the hard balance, because we've kept our day jobs. When I transitioned here, I had been selling real estate in Colorado, and after spending time with Brian and Jill O'Donnell, such beautiful people from Belpont, and friends, they were like, Lisa, you should get your real estate license, because no realtor here knows how to find quality vineyard property. So interestingly enough, I followed that advice, and it was quite a struggle the first year because you need to build, there's a time period within which you have to build credibility. But after that year, I remember Kevin Chambers, who is to me just such a beautiful, beautiful human being, and I don't even know that he knows how much he's influenced my life. But he, from digging pits on our property and saying I wouldn't walk there, I would run there, because it's a great property and I know the price of it and it'll be good for you guys. And so all the way to advising which books I should be reading, to expand my knowledge in viticulture, in organic practices and biodynamics, because he was at all three. But then when he got to the point where he began to refer business to me, because I think when people are looking to get into the wine industry, they go to somebody who understands, like, okay, what does it cost to develop? What does it cost to do this? What is the time frame? All of these things, right? And so he would start to refer. So I started selling vineyard and winery property, and I gave Mike McLean a good run for his money. He was the other real estate broker who's down a little bit further in Albany, I think, selling vineyard and winery property. And so I helped Robert Britton find his property. I helped Bill and Donna from Winderley find their property. I helped the Bjornsons find their property, the Becks also. So I worked in several people, Raptor Ridge, I helped them find their property, literally like right down the street from where they lived, which was, I think a really lovely thing for them. And so, and the beauty of that, so I got out of that after my second child came along. James Fry, Trisatum Winery, I found two of his properties. Three of his properties. I found his original estate where his home is, and then I found him his Ribbon Ridge property that originally only one of the pieces was for sale, and we were able to find and get the owner to sell this adjacent piece, and so those three pieces. And so to work with the upside, I remember Kevin sitting me down and saying, Lisa, you have to be very careful, because what you and Scott do is not the norm. When you sit there and say, oh, well, you can do it yourself, it's not the norm. And when I say do it yourself, it's not just been the grafting and the planting ourselves and managing our own vineyard and making our own wine and never hiring that out, but to the website building. Like Scott built our website, we
built this building.
We built this building. My sister and I laid the wood floors. So he said, you have to be really careful, because people coming in, it takes a unique individual to do what you guys are doing and what you have done. So you have to be really careful. And so then I shifted, and I would spend my first 2 hours with the customer talking them out of getting into the industry. Do you realize it's going to cost you this much money? Do you realize how much time it's going to be? Do you realize that if you're not paying somebody to get out and do this for you, you have to physically get out there and do it yourself? So I would spend a good amount of time talking them out. And if, after all of that, and a lot of them would say, wow, there's a lot more here to think about than I thought. But then if they were still committed and showed up the next day for the next appointment, it was like, okay, let's go walk property. And I loved that job. I loved that job so much because I was able to walk property with, I got the honor of walking property with Robert Britton, right? He being the amazing, Petite Syrah guru from California, from Stag's Leap, coming up to plant Pinot Noir, and to walk land with him and to talk geology and to talk about and tap into his infinite wisdom about varietals and clones and geology and rocks, and then how shocked I was when he bought his big pile of rocks that the vineyard was struggling because the people that owned it prior really didn't have the wherewithal to, but how then he took it and turned it around, to witness that all the way to the Bjornsons, and then to see oh, I knew that was a quality piece of property and could produce ultra premium Pinot Noir. I felt it as I was walking it, and that's why I would show it to people, this is a really great piece of property. I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to taste Atticus's wines, but I helped them find that property, two lovely human beings, Guy Inslee and Ximena Orrego. And to be able to taste their wines, we just went to a paella party this last summer where we got to taste some vertical vintages of theirs. I'm like, I knew it. I knew this could be such a beautiful place. And then to see the differences of geology and to then witness phylloxera, right? And how phylloxera on different soil types, like if you're on if you're on more devigorized soils, how phylloxera is going to wipe you out much, much more quickly, but how on certain soil types, there's a possibility that with this pest, you can create a symbiotic relationship by, farming organically and taking care of the land so that the vine is strong, that then it can still take care of the pests in a way. So to be able to witness that, Bill Wittenberg's property, which I know the Black family, which is Grace Vineyards, purchased, and to see them like come in and what they did to take something that was already there, like they already knew that the potential, the essence that comes through in the finished product was there, but then they came and laid it out in this herringbone pattern that was incredible, to switching over from conventional farming practices to biodynamic, and to then witness from a distance how that's been. So, but I mean, I worked really hard, and then my second child, who's now 11 years old, when she was born, it was just there. We were at maybe 2,800 cases, or just under 2,000 cases at that time, and something had to give, because I couldn't give that everything. But the beauty of it is that I would close something like, Hawksview Vineyard, which was originally Jack Kemp. Such a low, he's unfortunately no longer with us, but what a lovely, lovely man. And that's now since been sold to a California winery. But, to sit there and to have been a part of the industry in that way. But I remember, him telling me and giving me advice about trying to find that balance. And I knew something had to give, so stepping out when my second child was born, and the beauty of being able to embrace like raising chickens and raising babies and selling wine, right? And still, even though it felt like a lot of wine, it still wasn't that much wine, now in perspective, the perspective of it all. But no, so keeping the day jobs and really, knowing, being willing to sacrifice both ends of the wick, because that's what we did in the beginning for a good 10, 15 years. We would work our day jobs and come home and work this. And then being able to step back and breathe a little bit. And now we're at this sweet spot where, I do this, and then I do some other things that really feed my soul, and trying to really bring that balance back in and make up for the loss of balance in the beginning.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely had to go all in. I always go back to when we got married, we did a video. Luckily, her dad paid for a videographer, and my mom came on, and she gave this great advice. She was an amazing woman. And she said, marriage isn't always 50-50. Sometimes it's 90-10 and not in your favor. And you have to understand that that's part of the flow. And it's been true. And I think I probably get more of the 90 than I do the 10, because that's just kind of what happens. And so marrying a woman who's a great supporter is a really great thing. But do realize that it's not always, it's not this, scoreboard that we're trying to work to this end goal, and keeping the bigger picture in mind, I think, is extremely important than like getting focused on that day to day, like, boy, I gotta have that brand new car, the old truck is okay, because we need another vineyard, another block, so we gotta buy barrels. So having the perspective of, what is important, so we definitely forgo things to get to there.
And that's interesting, because the 90-10 translates to the relationship with the wine industry as well. And sometimes the 90-10 is not in your favor.
Right.
But what has always been 90-10 in our favor has been the relationships. And just kind of getting back to that, is I remember very early on coming, and we were just struggling. Like, our idea of a date night, which would happen like maybe once every 2 weeks, was going down to Moonlight Pizza and getting a pitcher of beer and sitting and catching a movie for really cheap.
I still love that.
But then I remember, like, Scott and Annie Scholl, like, they invited us to enjoy a dinner that they would have with friends at Red Hills Provincial. And we went there for the first time and had dinner, and it was lovely conversation, relationships, and to spend time with the people that own the restaurant there, super lovely people. And then the bill came, and I remember being very mindful of what I was ordering, because I knew what a super tight budget we were on. And then And then what happened was because all this wine got ordered as well, it was like all the men just threw their credit cards down, and I was just like, having this moment. And then they invited us afterwards, like at the end of that dinner. Well, we do this almost every Friday each year. And I was like,
Not gonna happen.
we'll see you guys in 2 months.
We'll save up.
But that's, the beauty of that though is then we polished up our cooking skills, and Scott
That's right.
smoked an awesome pork loin, and so then we started saying, hey, dinner night at our
Come
house.
over here.
So, which was even better to sit. I remember there was this old rotted deck on the back of the house down below, and you were never sure which board might just say but we would be there with our friends, staring up at the stars, having just filled our bellies with a beautiful meal, and staring up at the stars and tasting wines and allowing the experiences of the industry to unfold organically over the evening as we watch stars shoot across the sky. And that's the 90-10 in our favor for sure.
Yep.
All right. So, where do you see Coeur de Terre in the future? Where do you look when you look 5-10 years down the road? Where do you hope to see it?
Well, I hope to see us continue, frankly, to do what we're doing, of making wines of the place, having our daughters grow up in this beautiful place, trying to continue to be authentic and sell our wine and to people who understand what we're trying to do. I want to continue to be more part of the industry from helping with Willamette Valley Wineries Association and different things to continue to help solidify that history thing that we were talking about. Maybe our little one, she talks about wanting to do this one day. Who knows?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that I think that the importance is in the future of Coeur de Terre. I don't know. I look at it as the children, their experience being a part of the industry, but also eventually passing the torch. That's the hope. Mm-hmm. You can't dial that in when you're asking, or when when they're taking their first breath, all of a sudden they're blessed with it and the stars are across their forehead that there will be a winemaker. So, but I would love to see that. To me, it's the land that brings me the greatest joy. I love the land, I love being here and being a part of the agricultural aspect of it, and then the relationships that have been built into the industry, and just to continue on with that. I don't see us growing to be a huge winery by any means. It's not this great, we've got to be 10,000 cases or 15,000 cases. That's not it. I think it's, once again, I'm to that stage in my life. It's about finding balance, and I think we could grow a little bit bigger, but still keep not much. What we're just under 5,000 cases now, and that kind of ebbs and flows depending on the vintage, of course. But there's a possibility of taking it up to maybe 7,500 cases at some point. But that's about as big as we want to get. And I embrace small winery. I emulate it when I work the market. It's a challenge to compete. I think it's becoming more and more difficult as things are becoming more globalized. But I also feel that the authenticity of what we offer here is desired by most. It's the experience that you have here is more authentic. It's more generous in a lot of ways, because the people that are pouring the wines for you are really truly connected to what's happening at Coeur de Terre. So yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that. I'm curious, you're looking at roughly 20 years in the industry now. How have your consumers changed in that time? What are the expectations they have now they didn't used to have? And what is it that you, like you say, what is it that you deliver that they're asking for?
Well, it's interesting, because I think that's a big topic that gets mulled around, not just by us, but also some of our peers that are in the same boat in regards to size. Things are shifting here in the industry. I think that the influence of California coming in, and some good, obviously, because I do believe that you can't get the word out enough about what's happening in Oregon, and but it's also, there's the concept of experiences, this whole idea of now it's all about the experience. And to me, in my opinion, is that I don't know that we need to change and go that route. because it's when you come here, it's not just somebody standing behind the bar saying, and this is our Pinot Noir, you know, and that's always been that way. It's when people pour the wines, they understand the beauty and the depth of what's being poured, and so they share that along with it. And so initially we talked about like adding some experiences or kind of getting on that bandwagon, but I think people want to come and they want to have a place where they can have an honest conversation that's not an ego-driven conversation, right? Which is that creates an environment where within which they can feel comfortable asking questions, and they feel that maybe what little knowledge they have is enough for that, but then they can evolve based on the questions that they ask. And so that's the type of experience that we want to have here.
I think we've always had experience-driven things. I mean, I think we didn't call it that, but we've never been this place of, you know, here's Pinot, you know, go have, you know, your party or whatever. It's always been about coming out here and experiencing the place and understanding what's different. So I actually think we're ahead of the curve on that.
Well, and it's had to be that because we have always based everything that we do here on referral. Obviously, we're not easy to find. The beauty of it is that if you find us, you wanted to be here. So to me, that's like 90% of the battle right there. Like when they come walking in the door, you know that they want something. So we've always been extremely very generous with our time. So if somebody sits and they want to have a conversation for 2 hours about our wine, we're more than happy to facilitate that conversation. As is Jacques, as is Stephanie, as is you know, Emily Lynn. And so the beauty of that is that you know, we're able to have these incredible authentic conversations, and anywhere from, wow, I was in Germany and these Rieslings, and have it be about the Riesling, about the Syrah. You know, the other day I had he's the director, the new director of the zoo, which was like, I was so excited to have him here. And I'd been hanging out with him, talking to him before he even disclosed who he was. And I was saying, because we had the raptors, it was right around harvest, and there were a lot of raptors flying around, and then Scott was also using his drone to keep the smaller birds, and he was kind of giving a demonstration. And I was explaining how the Audubon Society had approved us last year as a property that is able for them to bring their birds of prey that have been rehabilitated to release.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's, I mean, when I say these other side projects that are not necessarily directly connected to wine, but are connected to wine, you know, and that was such an honor for them to approve the property, but then to be a part of the release of the raptors on the property, and to have my 11-year-old or even her entire school come out, you know, and experience these raptors up close. And then, you know, it's an educational process to be able to have an appreciation for agriculture and what we have here in the Willamette Valley. And I'm not just talking about wine, I'm talking about all of the beauty and the abundance, really, that the Willamette Valley has to offer. We have to take care of it. We have to protect it. We have to maintain the integrity and the authenticity of it, and making sure that even in regards to the wine component, that people aren't able to come across and taint or pass off or whatever in regards to what we have to offer here, because it is truly, truly special. And that was my draw. I mean, when you look at it coming here to Oregon, the number of individuals that support organic, if not biodynamic, that means these people are so committed, they're sacrificing, and there is a devotion, and almost in some instances, and dare I say, a spiritual devotion to what they're connected to. So, I don't know, did I answer your question?
I don't remember what question I asked, but it was a great answer regardless.
Right, thank you.
Where do you see, you talked about California influence and kind of the crossroads now, so where do you see the Oregon wine industry as you look down 5-10 years in the future? What do you see happening in the near future here?
I see us that we're going to codify and solidify exactly what we're talking about, that the industry is absolutely moving towards coming together to continue to solidify what we've started, and over the next 5 years that's absolutely happening through you know, guys like Dave Adelsheim, who was the original kind of guy who put in our original labeling and content laws, working with them to help continue to move that forward, and that's going to happen. And the industry's pulling together to make that happen, which is really great to see. We need to continue from an Oregon perspective to stay together. That's one thing that I think will be a challenge, because we are a very big state with a very diverse growing area, and trying to make sure that we take into consideration everybody's points of view on that is something that we need to continue to work towards. But all parts of Oregon will benefit from looking at their uniqueness of their own areas and making that their own and carving that out, much like the Willamette Valley has done with Pinot Noir. They will do well to do that with their own strengths, which they all have.
Do you see the growth we're seeing now as like something that's going to continue? I mean, we're averaging 50 to 75 new wineries a year lately. Do you see that kind of growth continuing for the foreseeable future?
I can't imagine it can go like that forever, but
I mean, I think it's going to continue, and I think that what has to, at least what I would like to see is I would like to see the Oregon culture remain the same. There's been such a gift of camaraderie when we came on board, that you could go down and Dick Ponzi was hanging out in his wine bar and you could have a conversation with him about it. And people like Myron Redford, who, I view him as, one of the founding fathers, but more of that gentle uncle that loves to hippie dance and, drink into the wee hours of the morning, but that you could go to and you could have conversations and no, I think that for us as an industry, we can't allow the outsiders coming in to change that camaraderie, that's all boats rise together philosophy or mentality, and that help one another, the willingness to help. Like for instance, in the situation, in Jimmy's situation. Which I think caught us all by surprise. I mean, I remember it was our anniversary the night before, the day before, and coming back and getting that call and thinking, oh, he must have gotten into another motorcycle accident. And then to realize, oh my gosh, are you kidding me, right? And then how the only place that we knew to go was to go sit in his home and just know that he was probably looking down going like, what the hell happened, right? And but that to embrace that camaraderie and the knocking on the doors of saying, hey, I really love this. Hey, can I walk your property? And what's going on with that? What are you doing? And I mean, some members of the community like Bryce Bagnall, who would pull people together and like taste wines and educate, and let's talk about this. And then he'd like huff everybody up to the top of his property and walk it, and like talk about that, or like what Dick Shea has done for years, right? Pulling these incredible winemakers together that pull, but then to continue that conversation and put our arms around each other and be like, oh, you're having trouble? How can I help you? And to be of service to one another still. And that's one thing that I noticed when I would visit California, when I would visit Oregon wine industry, those were the things that really allowed Oregon to stand apart, is that you walked in, typically the person pouring the wine for you is dusting themselves off of the tractor to come pour their wine for you. And even though that may have evolved or changed a bit, their willingness to give energy, to give information, education, like that's my hope that for Oregon, is that we maintain really what has made us unique in that free giving of what you have to offer, to be of service to one another. So.
Okay, that's all the questions that I have for you both, and thank you so much for all of your candid answers and time. Is there anything else I should have asked you before we go? Any final thoughts, last things you'd like to say?
So excited what Linfield's doing, right? And the donation of the Evanstats, to be able to, I think the growth of that is really quite amazing, and to see the ability, like Jeff Peterson, who has been a longtime club member of ours, and to see what he's been able to do at Linfield, and now to understand that there will be a master's program offered, which is, I mean, I want to sign up for it. But that's nice, because now there's a possibility that if the 11-year-old does want to take this on, there's someplace close that she can,
It's been a great 20 years.
Yeah. It is 20 years, I know, right? Yeah, so this was our 20th anniversary this year in August. So, yeah, it was a gift. There were times when I didn't think we were going to make it. Yeah.
We have.
Yep. Yeah.
So far, so good.
Makes it all the sweeter at the end, right?
Of course.
Yes, indeed.
Well, thank you both so
Thank
much.
you.
Really appreciate your time, and we'll go ahead and stop.